The Denver Gazette is counting down the top 10 sports stories of 2023, and we have reached number 3 on our list, which is the Broncos hiring Sean Payton and just the Sean Payton era, just in general. So I'm joined by Chris Tomasson, who you were not here when they hired Sean Payton, but you have been a part of it pretty much since the draft, right?
Yeah, he was hired in February, and I came on board in March. So kind of near the tail end of free agency. So I got tail end of free agency, and then throughout the draft, and then moving onward.
So, you of course were covering the Vikings before this, but you knew what was going on with the Broncos in 2022, the mess that Nathaniel Hackett had here. The team was kind of in disarray. So they decided to go out and hire an adult in Sean Payton, who, as we found out, has his faults, and we'll get into that more. But did you see this as the Broncos had to hire a coach with experience? Like, this was kind of a must hire for the Broncos.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. All the previous coaches had no NFL coaching experience. You had head coaching experience. You had Vance Joseph, then you had Vic Fangio, then you had Nathaniel Hackett. None had ever been a head coach. They needed a veteran head coach. And obviously, if you're the Walton Penner ownership group and you just bought the team for the biggest price ever since Eclipsed for an NFL team, and you got tons of money, well, if you're going to hire a veteran coach, you're probably going to want to hire one who has a Super Bowl win on his resume, and that's exactly who they brought in with Sean Payton.
So the Sean Payton the era kind of gets off to a rough start, because I always remember, the first thing I remember about him is the USA Today interview with him ripping Hackett and everything like that. So, what do you he's a confident, probably sometimes cocky guy. You probably can agree to that with you being around him more than me. But, what were your thoughts when he decided to do that? Because it was just not normal for a coach to rip another coach like that.
Yeah, that was surprising. I mean, Sean Payton came in and pretty much has let everybody know that he's the boss. He's the first word in player personnel moves over George Payton. That's become abundantly clear. And then he was brought down a little bit after that. I mean, he made those comments to USA Today, which were out of line and unnecessary. I mean, everybody knows that last year was an utter disaster with Nathaniel Hackett. So it was nothing new. I mean, he said what a lot of people thought, but what was the point in saying that? I mean, he ended up firing up the Jets, and that possibly cost the Broncos a loss in week 5. And, that was one of the few times I think that Denver ownership kind of told him, that wasn't the best of moves. So, yeah, that wasn't a great start. And when the Broncos started out 0-3 and lost 70-20 at Miami in week 3, I think there were some people saying that Sean Payton had gotten his comeuppance, after those comments. But, they turned it around. I mean, they lost to the Jets, as I noted, in week 5. They fell to 1-5, but to Sean Payton's credit, then the season completely turned around after that.
Yeah, disclaimer, we are recording this after the Lions game. The Broncos are sitting at 7-7. When this publishes, we will be after New England. So things could have changed. They're in the thick of the playoff hunts. That we can all say. That's all I can say now. After starting 1-5, how did you feel when they hired Vance Joseph as a defensive coordinator, who, was the scapegoat early on, then was kind of back up as oldest guy is a great coordinator till, he didn't have his greatest game against Detroit. That drew a lot of, criticism here in Denver because of his, previous stop here. But what did you think of that hire?
Well, I wasn't actually covering the team when it was initially
That's right.
done, the deal. But from the outside, I was kind of thought it was odd because, I mean, he was just the head coach here a couple of years ago, and some players are still around from then. I thought that was a little bit odd. And then obviously he didn't have the best of head coaching tenures in Denver, and his reputation as a defensive coordinator. I mean, he's been known over the years as a solid coach, but Arizona didn't exactly tear it up the last 4 or so years when he was the defensive coordinator. Yeah, so I thought it was an interesting hire. It might have been the type of hire. Let's say that Sean Payton was a defensive coach and the defensive coordinator wasn't necessarily the guy calling the plays, but Sean Payton's an offensive guy and he's totally turning his defense over to Vance Joseph. So I thought it was an interesting hire. And then at the start of the season, I mean, the defense was a disaster, but it's utterly been amazing how overall the defense has turned around under Vance Joseph, and you certainly have to give him a ton of credit for staying the course, never panicking. You know, they made some lineup changes that ended up helping Jaquan McMillan at nickelback, Fabian Moreau at cornerback, Nick Benito playing a bigger role. But they didn't like make wholesale changes and just trade off guys at the trade deadline. So that's a credit to them that they stayed the course, tinkered, and the defense turned around.
So we can't talk about the Broncos without talking about Russell Wilson. It's just they go hand in hand. And, you know, his and Peyton's relationship, we're recording this after the Lions game where they had their little spat on the sideline. But, you know, deep down, how do you think that pairing has worked?
Well, I mean, last year when Russell Wilson pretty much got carte blanche of whatever he could do, didn't exactly turn out the best. I mean, just look at how bad of a season that Wilson had. The team went 5-12. I mean, everything was a disaster. I think, you know, Wilson's smart enough to know that Peyton obviously has a great track record with quarterbacks. He's a Super Bowl winning coach. And to his credit, I mean, I think Wilson has bought in to what Peyton has wanted him to do. I mean, low risk passes, although they have in recent games been airing it out a little bit more. And I mean, Wilson's got a huge contract. He's well compensated. He speaks positively every week. If he has anything that he's thinking deep inside that he hasn't revealed, I don't know about it. And the ball will be in the Broncos' court as to when they potentially want to cut the cord with Wilson, because Wilson's got a ton of money coming. So he'll just wait to hear from them on how long they want him to stick around.
Yeah, that was kind of, you know, it's hard to predict this because we don't know how this season will end quite yet. But, I mean, Sean Payton's got a big contract, too. He's going to be – is it a 5-year deal? 6-year deal? 5?
Yeah, most people have estimated it as 5 years, $90 million, so about $18 million a year.
So, I mean, if he does – I mean, if he's going to be here for a couple years at least. And I think they're going to – like you said, they're going to have to make that decision if Sean Payton and Russell Wilson can work. And that's tough to predict right now. So we won't dive into that too much. But, I mean, this season as a whole, you know, you and I kind of talked on other like podcasts and stuff about this season slowly becoming at least some type of a success for them. And after what Broncos country has gone through in the last couple of years, it has been a success. And do you see it as a success?
Yeah, they went 5-12 last year. Last year was a disaster, and they had more talent than a 5-12 team should be. And I think anytime you can, I mean, we'll have to see what they finish. If they finish 9-8, that's a 4-game improvement. If they win out, again, we're talking before the Patriots game. If they win out, then they're 10-7, and yeah, that's a 5-game improvement. I think anytime you can make those type of improvements. I mean, it often doesn't completely and totally happen overnight. And Sean Payton himself, early this season when they were 1-5, he pointed to the Detroit Lions turning around last season when they were 1-6. They started out 1-6, finished 9-8, didn't make the playoffs, but it served as a springboard to this season. So if anything, turning things around after going 1-5. The hope is that even if they don't make the playoffs this season, it serves as a springboard for 2024.
So I'm going to end on a little bit of a negative note, but how unreal was it to be in Miami that day when they gave up 70 points?
I mean, you're looking at the points continuing to accumulate, and you're thinking, okay, they're not going to get to 70. Nobody scores 70 because when the score becomes hopelessly lopsided, you just run the ball up the middle. Well, I mean, the Dolphins did throw a long pass, but even when they ran the ball, it was a long run. I mean, it was just absolutely crazy. And I thought on the last drive, which finally ended when they took a knee instead of kicking a field goal, I thought they were just going to hand the ball to some guy, and he was going to run up the middle right through the gut, and it was going to be 77 points. So alas, it was just 70. But hey, I like to say that I've seen two teams in that various stadium score 70 points. In the Orange Bowl, January 1st, 2012, I was there when West Virginia put 70 on Clemson, and Clemson bounced back and won a few national championships later that decade. So one can survive 70-point outings.
Yeah, the positive of that is they have, besides giving up 42 to the Lions this past week, the defense has bounced back since that, and I think that's been pretty amazing in itself.
Yeah, and the Washington Redskins lost 73 to nothing in 1940 to the Chicago Bears, and then beat them a couple of years later in the NFL championship game. So you can bounce back from giving up 70. But yeah, you mentioned it. I mean, that's the type of defeat that could have just totally demoralized the defense, but they've recovered in fine fashion.
And a crazy what if is, or not a what if, but a crazy scenario is the Broncos could be back in Miami if they make the playoffs.
They could indeed. And also, it was interesting that the Raiders almost scored 70 on the Chargers a few weeks ago. Yep. But hey, they called off the Dogs, and at least for this season, there's still a couple weeks left, but the Broncos at this point still stand alone as being the first team to give up 70 since 1966.
All right, Chris, thanks for coming on and doing this. We always know that the Broncos are a big story in Denver and Colorado sports. They're never boring. There's always something going on. So, Chris, thanks for doing this. And make sure to go to denvergazette.com/sports to make sure to check out our full countdown. And Chris, have a happy holidays, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Sounds great. Thanks.